Excited to have everybody here to talk about a pretty important topic right now that we're seeing a lot of companies struggle with, and that's how do you leverage data in that sales hiring process. We've got a really large group today who had signed up, and I think the interest in this topic kind of reinforces what we're seeing with many of the owners and sales leaders that we work with, that people are frustrated with the fact that they might go out and hire, but the past performers, the people that they've hired in the past, just really aren't able to produce at the level that they are expecting them to. So today we're going to cover a few things around how data impacts. We're going to talk a little bit about 2020, how what are some of the challenges that we're seeing kind of from pandemic going to post-pandemic. What do we see that mean for 2021? And as you're hiring, what are some of the characteristics or competencies that you should be looking for in people, and how can you leverage data? And I'm going to share some stats on the number of people that have certain skill sets out there as we're looking for them. We're going to talk briefly about what's the impact of sales management on the whole process and share some information on that. Look at that whole sales recruiting process and see how it is, in many cases, it's broken for hiring effective salespeople, and share with you some insights on how you might be able to do it a better way. Now, through this, certainly I encourage everybody, if you have questions, we want to make this interactive. So if you have questions, please put them in the questions, or you can put them in the chat panel. So certainly want to be able to do that. I've got Truett Dill, my associate, with me here today, who's going to be helping us with a couple polls, as well as being able to make sure that I'm touching on all of those questions that you may have. So just kind of brief introduction. My name is Jim Morgan with People Stretch Solutions. We're a management consulting firm that really helps organizations scale revenue through sales transformation, as well as helping with CEO advisory strategy and making sure that everything is aligned to scale the organizations as you grow. My background, I've been doing sales management, owner and president of a company, and really have been around growth and sales for over 35 years. And so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. How do you find good salespeople? So to kick us off, I'm going to have two polls that I'm going to ask Truett to go ahead and launch here. Really want to see amongst the group that we have here just a couple questions. And so the first poll that we're going to have is, when you think of the people that you've hired in the past 2 years, so those new hires that you brought on board, what percentage of them would you say are performing to expectations? Is that 75 to 100%? You're knocking it out of the park? Is that 50 to 75%? Would you say it's 25 to 50 or less than 25%? So it looks like we've got about, with 85% of the poll, 87% of the poll, it looks like we have that 36% are saying that it's about 50 to 75%, 43% say it's less than, or 50 to 25%, and 14% say 25 to or less. So only 7% are saying that they are seeing 75 to 100% of the people actually performing. So that's great, but most people are in that mid-range. So the second question I'm going to put out there is, when you look at your existing team, so your current sales force, what percentage of those people do you feel are performing to expectations, achieving their goals? All right, getting a lot of votes in. So it looks like we have a tale of two cities. So with 93% of the votes in, there's about 71% say that it's in that 50 to 75% of their team. And so only about a quarter of their team, let's say, are not producing. But then there's 21% who are saying that it's less than 25% of their team. So a real sign that we have some teams that are absolutely struggling. So thank you for that information. I'm going to refer back to that a little later, but just wanted to kind of jump right in here. So this is a picture that I can relate to. I can't tell you how many presidents and CEOs in the last year I've seen that have had this look, sales leaders as well. 2020 has been quite the year, and so it really has challenged a lot of people. But when it comes to sales leadership, there are certain things that from the pandemic and as we start looking post-pandemic that are really been a challenge for everyone. So here's the, let me just go into a few of the things that we're seeing are really challenging for sales teams or sales leadership. So first off, current teams are really struggling with achieving the goals or achieving their quotas. So we saw that in the survey that we're seeing that we had that it's been a real struggle. Now, it would be easy for us to say, well, that was just because of people working remote or people having challenges of working during the pandemic. But the reality is that the data shows us that since around 2008, 2009, with the economic downturn then, that more and more sales teams have had a challenge of hitting quota. And so I'm going to share some of that data with you, but really, it's about 50% has been at the high, or 57% has been the high watermark in there. So we really need to look at how do we help our teams get better at achieving those quotas. The second challenge, which goes hand in foot with that, or hand in glove with that, is the fact that we have a challenge with virtual sales team. You know, when we look at sales teams and the characteristics of even weaker sales reps, there are two characteristics that always rise to the top that are strong. So most salespeople have strong presentation skills. They're able to come in and talk about their organization, or they're able to really leverage the second one, which is relationship building. And so between relationship building and sales presentation skills, there's a lot of people that have basically been able to, you know, go visit customers on a regular basis, do what we used to call kind of that milk route of just swinging by people and trying to get in front of them. But now in this virtual environment, this working remote environment has been a real challenge to be able to get in front of people, especially because now you almost have to be able to define and show that you can add value before you can even get that first appointment. So that's been a real challenge for sales teams. The other thing is there's this shift from really being order takers. You know, when the economy was good, when there was lots of demand, that there were a lot of salespeople that were put in that role that they could answer the phone or they could be able to talk to their clients and just get a continuous flow of work. And so they're making that transition from order taker to demand generator. So now they need to be much more proactive in going out and trying to find and generate new business. And so that's been a shift that some salespeople haven't had to deal with in many years, that now, because of the current environment, they've had to do that. And then the last thing that's certainly from a sales leadership standpoint that we're seeing for owners of companies, presidents of companies, is they're looking at how do they build that team that can help maximize their growth. And in some cases, it's rebuilding the team because we saw early on in this year, once the pandemic hit, there were a lot of teams and a lot of organizations. I'd say probably half to 2/3 of the organizations that I work with or the owners of companies that I know were doing some shedding or trimming down of the sales force. So they were looking at those people that were not producers or weren't hitting their numbers, and they were either reallocating them or cutting them from their base. And so now they're looking at, how do I need to either replace some of the people that I have with better quality, so doing a little bit of upgrading, or what do I need to do to add people on that can go out and find net new. And one of the real challenges of that when it comes to sales recruiting is that because there's been kind of this shedding of the lower performers, the market's filled with a lot of mediocre salespeople. You know, let's face it, trying to find salespeople who can produce when interviewing is difficult at any time. But certainly now, when you've got people or a larger group of people that are out there looking for sales jobs or for business development jobs or capture jobs, that there's more people in that probably were released from their last job for good reason. And so, how do you go through and really identify the people that can really produce for you, the people that are actually going to be strong, and not the people that are in that mediocre crowd? So let's look a little bit about the sales process and why the sales process is broken. Salespeople are different than other people that you might hire for. Salespeople need to produce and perform in what can be sometimes a hostile environment. They're trying to get in front of clients who they get past that gatekeeper. They're trying to be able to establish value, find off competition, and so it's a pretty difficult work environment that many salespeople are expected to work in. And yet, when we're hiring salespeople, we frequently treat them like we would any other new person that's coming on. I work with a lot of companies here in the DC area who are IT or cybersecurity, and they're clamoring to get talent onto their teams. And so they create a very welcoming environment. They really want to make sure that they're spending more time selling the value of the company than they are determining the qualifications. And so while they might need to do that for someone who has strengths in AI or somebody who is a cyber specialist, the fact is that salespeople aren't going to be experiencing that type of a welcome once they're on the job. And so what do we do to make sure that the only sale this person's able to do isn't selling us on hiring them? So let's look at what a traditional hiring process tends to look like. So frequently what we're doing is we're posting an ad. The ad frequently talks about the company and talks about what a great place it is to work for and our culture. We collect all the resumes. So in our example here, we're collecting 50 resumes. We're spending time now reviewing those 50 resumes, and we're already starting to, what tends to happen is we start creating some resume bias. So we tend to look for people that were in our industry or selling the exact same products that we are selling. We tend to look for people that were working with big name companies. And so we are starting to classify them and create some bias just based off of those resumes that we're seeing. We then might call the top 10 of those and spend some time really doing a quick screen, getting to understand kind of whether or not we think they'd be worth spending more time in interviewing. Then we'll spend time going through a deeper interview with them, only to then select our top 2 or 3 that are we're going to bring in for in-depth interview. And along the way, we frequently are creating not only the resume bias, but we're creating a bias just from an interview bias. As I mentioned, even the weaker salespeople have really good presentation skills. Even the weaker salespeople can create good relationships. And so frequently we think, oh, they're extroverted, they're easy to talk to, they're comfortable, they're certainly going to be good in front of my prospects. The challenge is do they have the capabilities that they're going to need in order to be successful out in that more hostile world? So what ends up happening is that we finally select that first one, and we hope and pray that they're going to be successful. So in our example here, we've invested about 20 hours, and we probably have a 50-50 shot, according to the statistics that you guys had provided earlier. Some were a little bit better than that, but most of them were in that 50 to 75% or 25 to 50% of new hires. So probably close to that 50-50 shot as far as the population of everybody that's on this call that we're seeing. So let's talk about, now that we're going into, what are some of the characteristics that we absolutely need to be looking for. And I'm going to share some data around what we're seeing in the marketplace as far as the skill sets that people have or the competencies that people have. So 2020, when we look back at 2020 with all of the challenges, our numbers show that about 40% of all salespeople were able to obtain quota in 2020. For the most part, that is the most important thing that a sales manager needs to do, is how do they get their team to achieve quota? What are we going to do to make sure that we're hitting our numbers? Now, the bottom half, only about 5% were able to hit their quota. Now, let me explain for a minute what I mean by all versus the bottom half. So a lot of the data, not all the data, but a lot of the data I'm going to share with you today comes from Objective Management Group. So they're a group that does sales-specific assessments. They've assessed over 2 million salespeople in over 1,500 industries or 1,500 companies. And they really look at 21 specific sales competencies and the attributes that you need to be successful in sales. So it's a very sales specific. And of all those 2 million, they actually give a scoring for each one of those candidates on where they fall from 1 to 100 in the percentile of everyone scored. So those top 5% we look at those as being the elite. And so not everybody needs somebody that's in this classification, but the elite salespeople are those that are going to perform well in companies that have a very complex sale. Maybe those that have a very long sales cycle where there's lots of competition. That next group, 15%, the next 15% is what we would call strong. And so those are ones that still have a lot of the sales competencies that you need. They're probably very good in organizations and can achieve their quotas when they're in organizations where maybe it's a little bit less complex of a sale or where the competition isn't quite as great as it is on some of these other ones. And then the next group is what we call the serviceable. And so these are people that have a decent amount of the sales competency, certainly have the ability to be able to be trained and grow into a strong or even into a elite, but they are what we would call serviceable. And then we separate that bottom half. That bottom half is kind of everybody else. And so when we're looking at that, remember what I was talking about, that market's flooded with somewhat mediocre. You figure that that there's probably more that are out there on the marketplace right now that are in that bottom half. So how do you go about finding those people that are going to perform? So again, when we look at quota attainment, which is pretty critical, that bottom half is less likely. They're probably not going to be very good at being able to be able to achieve quota. Some might be surprised that the 5%'s even there, and that's probably because there's a lot of jobs where either demand is very high, or frequently, from my experience when I'm working with sales teams, I'll be looking at it and the owner will say, well, you've rated Sally very low from a sales skill standpoint, but she's one of our top performers. And typically what we find out is that she's been there for much longer than she's kind of outlasted everyone else, and so she's acquired accounts. So it's not uncommon for owners or presidents to look and say, well, I have some people that you're listing as being in the bottom half who are still hitting their quota. And frequently that's because either demand is really high or they've outlasted other people and they have acquired a lot of work. So now in the next few parts of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really talk about what are the core competencies that you should be looking for in 2021 that are going to help people attain that quota. So first and foremost, one of the most important is how do they differentiate? How are we going to find people that can, in the marketplace, differentiate us from other organizations that we're competing with? CSO Insights, which some of you may know, is the research arm for Miller Heiman. They do studies on lots of different things with clients as well as salespeople. And one of the interesting things that they recently posted was they've updated the number that 65% of all buyers still find value in working with a salesperson, and 45% of those people actually want salespeople to bring new ideas, to challenge the way they're thinking, and to be able to really help them find new ways to do things. So salespeople still have a lot of value, especially in differentiating in that B2B or the B2G space. And so how do we have salespeople differentiate? Really, that gets down to consultative selling skills. And so amongst all salespeople, 41% strong competencies in consultative selling. In that bottom half, only about 1% have strong competencies in consultative selling. Now, consultative selling at its core, most of us know, means that they have really strong questioning skills. They're able to uncover and ask the tough questions. They're able to listen and stay in the moment and make sure that they're uncovering exactly what the customer might have. So while listening skills and questioning skills are strong or important in consultative selling, really the core of that is how are they finding out those fundamental buying motives? How are they understanding what's driving the customer, what the need is, and then how can they differentiate from their competition? So certainly that's one of the core competencies. As we look at the next one, we've seen a lot of pressure on margins in the last year. So certainly even existing customers, I've got a lot of customers I work with who say that their current customers are coming back to them and trying to push on getting lower prices. Part of that might be just because they're tight on budget. It may also be that there's some competition out there who is a little bit more desperate, who's selling on price, and so kind of pushing that they can offer things on low price. We also see that new customers typically are trying to look at price first. And so it really requires somebody that has the ability to be able to sell value. Now, amongst all salespeople, about 54% of them have these strong competencies. And only about 4% of the bottom share these competencies. Now let's talk for just a minute about what it takes to sell value. So typically when we're looking for the attributes of somebody that is able to sell value, we're looking at, are they able to focus on value over price? Are they comfortable discussing money and the value that their company might bring? Do they sell value first, or do they have a process that supports that? And one of the most important is, do they really spend time learning why the prospects buy? What's driving that? And then we also look for people that have a low need for approval. People that tend to have a high need for approval will not push the customer or ask those difficult questions. So certainly what we've seen in this marketplace is that we want to find salespeople that are resistance proof. And so buyers are resistant to buying from people that they've never bought before, buying things that they've never bought before. And so as we're going in and consultatively selling, frequently our biggest competitor is the status quo, doing nothing. And so we need to be able to be resistance proof. And so some of the characteristics that we look for in this is know that the need to be liked doesn't get into the sales rep's way, that they're willing to ask those tough questions, really push the customer outside their comfort zone and challenge the way that they're thinking about what they might need. So this is some of the things that we're looking for when we're trying to find that resistance-proof seller. Again, I want to just pause for a minute. No, I'm talking a lot. If there's any questions you have or anything that you want to ask, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the questions box, and Truett will let me know that you have some questions. Now, the next thing we want to look for when we're trying to find those people that can produce is people that are able to build pipeline. I can't tell you the number of companies that I've talked to who have actually had a pretty decent year in 2020 because their pipeline is full. But now they're starting to look at 2021 and they're realizing that they've cleared out their pipeline. So they were able to capitalize on a lot of those deals that the salespeople had already started to working on. But the challenge of not being able to access and get to decision makers, the ability to be able to go out and find new opportunities, which was somewhat driven by that working remote, clients aren't in their office, we have to find them at home now, that their pipelines are empty or their pipelines are severely depleted. So to find people that can really help us build that pipeline, we really need to find those people that have strong hunting skills. And so those are the people that will consistently prospect. They have a low need for approval. They're willing to really they have the ability to go out and find the decision makers and to meet with the decision makers, even if it's trying to find them remote. They're able to create value as to why somebody should even want to talk to them. They recover from rejection quickly as well. So those are just some of the characteristics that we look for in that hunter. But I would say that most teams that I'm talking to, most people that I'm working with, when they really start looking at it, they maybe have 1 or 2 hunters on their team, and they're looking for how do I add new. Some don't have any hunters because they've had people that have really become much more of account managers, or they're nurturing the current or existing clients as opposed to going out and truly finding that new. So certainly one of the things we want to look for when we're trying to find people. So kind of last data point when it comes to the salespeople is that we started looking at the data around who are those people that are suitable for working remote or for selling a remote. And so again, we have a lot of traditional salespeople that will tend to, they were used to being able to stop by the customer's office, or they were able to take people out for drinks or do networking events, and that's how they were generating, again, leveraging relationships in order to bring people in. And now we need to, because people are working from home, there are some salespeople that are really struggling with that. And so one of the things that we look for, or some of the things we measure on seeing if somebody is suitable for working remote, is we look for, are they a self-starter? Are they able to work independently, and do they manage their time well? And are they able to work without supervision? Because the fact of the matter is that there's a large majority of sales managers that tend to manage more hands-off or laissez-faire as opposed to managing more closely. And so if you don't have a strong sales manager who's managing closely, you definitely need to be able to find people who are suitable for working remote. No surprise that as we look down through the categories of our elite producers, 67% of the capability, strong, about 61% of them, serviceable, 51, and on that bottom 50%, only about a third of the people actually are suitable for working remote.
Hey, Jim, quick question. How much would you weigh having sold remote in the past? As in, like, if you're assessing a candidate, or I guess the question more is like, do our assessments, how much do they weigh having sold remote in the past?
So that's a great data point, because it's one that you can't take by itself without also understanding exactly what is the sales management, what sales management do they work under as well. And we've seen certainly a lot of salespeople are much stronger today than they were on March the 1st of last year at using video and working remote. So certainly it would be a data point that we would look at in this. We want to have more people that are able to work remote, especially if it's something that in your field you're going to have somebody in that character that has that characteristics. And so absolutely, it's one data point. It wouldn't be necessarily a make or break unless you know that they're going to have to get to clients. And so if they have strong hunting skills, they're probably going to be able to develop this. If they have strong consultative selling skills, they'd be able to develop this. But certainly the ability to be able to know where they are in this would be important. Okay. Great. So want to look for just a minute on, since we're pulling on the threads on data, and Davis had given us a good question there about, working remote, and sales management actually has an impact on this. But when it comes to sales recruiting and what we're looking for, I think it's important to see what the skill sets are of our sales managers. And so just going to share 2 quick data points on this. So the first is all around recruiting. And so many sales managers typically aren't very good at recruiting. It's not where they came from. And so as a result of all sales managers, only about 18% are really strong in the recruiting competency. Really no one in the bottom half. That doesn't mean in the bottom half there aren't people that can recruit. It's just that they're not strong in kind of the threshold that we set for the capabilities. And so, I've worked with a lot of sales managers trying to help them become better at recruiting. And there's a few things that I find get in the way. So one is they will frequently value product knowledge or the ability that they've sold in the past over, or that they've sold that product over specific sales skills. And so there's an emphasis on that. We also see a lot of people will look for, is there somebody that can bring a book of business, even though that book of business may not transfer. And so they tend to look more for what I would call retreads as opposed to people that have strong sales competencies that we can train them on the product. The other thing that I've seen is that a lot of sales managers come from the sales ranks, and sales people frequently will help guide the client to a particular answer. And so, if the client doesn't know the answer, they'll fill in. So you'd be surprised at the number of interviews that I've observed where the sales manager is asking a question, the candidate's struggling, and the sales manager steps in to help them answer that question. And so I think that's part of the challenges that we see from a sales management standpoint. The other one's probably much more difficult, or even a bigger risk, and that is that only about 7% of sales managers are strong in coaching. We believe that sales managers should be spending about 50% of their time really developing their people, both developing their skill sets, being able to help them with opportunity coaching. And so only about 7% have very strong coaching capabilities. Why is that important in the recruiting process, you may add? Well, you might hire even a really strong sales candidate, but they may fail because of some of the challenges that we don't have a good onboarding. I was recently working with a large cyber company, and their owner had basically said that we spend a lot of money to hire expensive talent, and so we expect that they are going to come in knowing exactly what to do. But some of them are failing, and part of that was because they weren't really getting the proper onboarding they needed to be successful. They weren't understanding the organization. They weren't understanding the differentiation between those products. And so certainly we want to see sales managers have a strong onboarding process. And again, this is an area that the bottom half of the sales management is very weak in. So I've been sharing a lot of different data with you, and I want to just talk a little bit now about where this data comes from and how we might be able to use a different approach. So over the past 35 years, I've used probably 7 to 8 different assessments in hiring. Some of them are very good for hiring leadership or management. Many of them are behavioral based or personality based. And so they tend to, with a wide brush, say that, oh, this person is an extrovert, so they're going to be good for sales, or this person relates well to people, and so they're going to be good. They're a people person, so they're going to be good at sales. And I found that most of those are not very good at being able to repeatedly be able to predict whether or not somebody's going to be successful in the field. So I like objective management group's data from a sales hiring. As I mentioned before, they've assessed over 2 million salespeople, and it really is sales specific. It looks at those 21 characteristics of a sales competencies that a sales rep needs to be successful. What I really like about it is just the fact that it's been accurate and predictive. It's been tested as such. And so 92% of those people that they recommend for hire, when we reach back out to them, they have moved to the top half of the sales force within that first 12-month period of years. So 92% that were recommended really rise through the ranks of the sales team. Likewise, about 75% of those that are not recommended but hired anyway fail within the first 6 months. And this is something that we certainly have seen, that there's times when we say, hey, this person is not recommended and here's all the reasons why, that because of that bias I talked about, because of that interview bias, or this person has a great pedigree on their resume, or this person has sold for our competitors and they were really successful there, they had the highest book, they'll bring them in anyway. And frequently, a lot of the things that we saw were a challenge during that assessment, that early recruiting assessment, came to light when they were actually there and now working. So let's compare kind of how we might use data in a different way. So the chart on the left-hand side shows what I had described before, that collecting resumes, the looking at resumes and talking. When we convert that, we like to post a slightly different ad. So we like to post an ad that really gets the attention and weeds out people from applying by setting the bar relatively high as to what we're looking for when we're actually posting that. Then when we get those resumes back, we use automation to immediately send them out an assessment, and so that we can find out from them exactly whether or not we think they have the right skill sets or the right competencies. So then once they take that assessment, and the nice part about that is from an HR standpoint, we can assess everybody that applies. So if 100% of the applicants are applied, we're treating them equally across the board, and we're getting good data before we even start to create some of those biases. So now from the recommended pool, we can spend just a few minutes quickly talking to them on the phone to screen, to see, to challenge them, to give them a stall to see how they respond to that. And so we put them in a little bit of a sales type environment on that first interaction just to see how they'll respond. And so from that, we'll be able to pull those top few candidates that we're going to, those top 3 candidates that we're going to be able to talk to, and then ultimately hire that final candidate where we know that they've got good sales skill sets. One of the other great things about doing this is that it allows us to also be able to understand exactly what their weaknesses are, what some of their self-limiting beliefs are, where are they likely to have challenges, because even those elite salespeople have some areas where they might be challenged. And so now our onboarding is much more effective because we can actually customize it based off of what their capabilities are in order to make sure that they're up and running effectively. So a lot of information I know that I've shared there as far as some of the data we should be looking for, how we can leverage that data in order to find good hires. And so we're right about at the time. I wanted to try to make sure that we're in that 30 to 40 minute to give you a few minutes in case you have additional questions. So I'm going to pause there for a minute to see if amongst the group that we have any questions. How do I make sure that from a equity standpoint, how do I make sure that I'm not that I'm leveraging the assessments properly? Some assessments end up being set up in such a way that they cost per assessment, and so one of the things that we like about the model is just making sure that the cost is based off of hired, not off of all the people that assess. So it makes it very economical to be able to use for new hiring because you're not getting charged every time. No, we went through a lot of information today, so wanted to thank you for your time. Hopefully we've been able to give you something to think about as to what should we be looking for in the new hires that are going to be successful in this next year, as well as what are some of the characteristics, what are some of the competencies, and how can we actually get data on those people in order to be much more effective as well. Part of that is that if we have that data, it really changes the conversations that we're having in those interviews. We can go much deeper in understanding what that person's impact is on the sale or where that person may have had a challenge in the sale than we would if we didn't have that data going into the interviewing process. So want to share my information here. So Jim Morgan, People Stretch Solutions. I'll be sending out an email to everybody in the next day or two. Certainly would welcome the opportunity for a brief 10, 15-minute call to answer any questions that you have or share some insights around your specific industry, possibly on areas that we've been able to work with organizations. So appreciate your time today and look forward to speaking with you in the days to come. Have a great day.